Welcome into Survivor Analytics. I am your host, Clyde, and today I am continuing to walk through my ranking of every winning game of US Survivor. Last week, I covered the bottom tier winners, those players who lack strategic agency and completely mismanage their threat levels. In that podcast, I also outlined my criteria for these rankings. So with that out of the way, we can jump back into the list. At number 40, I have a winner whose game is similar to Mike's and Rachel's in that she needed to win out, but those immunity challenge wins were not necessary until much later in the season. It's Jenna Morasca, the winner of Survivor the Amazon. I've never been particularly high on Jenna's winning game, and to be honest, I was surprised when I finished the list and found that there were 7 winners below her. There's 2 main issues that I take with Jenna's win. The first is obviously her reliance on immunity wins. Jenna is on the bottom starting at the final 4. She is in a spot for 2 straight rounds where she goes home without the immunity necklace. The second issue is her resilience within the game. Many people forget this, but Jenna reaches a breaking point around the final 5, and she genuinely considers quitting the show. I will admit though that Jenna was well positioned for most of the season up until the final 7 where she loses control. In the pre-merge, she carves out a spot in the majority of the Brkich tribe. At the swap, she connects with Alex and Rob, which pays dividends later in the season. Then in the early merge, Jenna is a central figure of the Young Person Alliance, which runs that section of the game, taking out the likes of Roger, Dave, and Dina. By the time Jenna reaches the final 7, she's sitting in a great spot at the core of a 4-person majority. Unfortunately for Jenna, her ally Alex tells Rob that he's number 4 in their alliance, which causes Rob to flip against that group. He votes out Alex at final 7, blindsiding Jenna in the process. From that point forward, Jenna is on the bottom with no real control in the game. But it's important to recognize that if Rob stayed loyal at final 7, Jenna had a clear path to the final 3 with Alex and Heidi. Now, I don't know if Jenna beats either of them in a jury vote, but it's impressive that there was the potential there for a deep run. Even when Jenna is pushed to the periphery of the tribe, she does some solid work from that spot. At final 6, she wins individual immunity and passes the necklace to Heidi, which preserves Heidi as a shield for an additional round. Keep in mind that Jenna loses immunity at final 5, so without this move, there is a chance that Heidi goes out at 6 and Jenna goes out at 5. I'd also credit Jenna for her social work at the final 3, where her connection with Matt leads him to intentionally throw the final immunity challenge because he does not want to be the player that votes out Rob. Jenna ends up beating Matt in a 6-1 jury vote, which actually undersells her winning stock since, Matt is Matt. Jenna had 2 contestants on the jury in Alex and Heidi who would vote for her in any combination. Jenna was a real jury threat, and even if she somehow faced off against the season's best player in Rob in the final tribal, I think it's a very close vote. In that scenario, Jenna has the locked votes of Alex and Heidi, while Rob gets Dina, Matthew, and Butch. The season's winner is essentially determined by the jury votes of Dave and Chrissy, so who knows what happens there. So when I look at Jenna's game at large, I feel that she escaped the bottom 5 of the list due to her lesser reliance on production interference and immunity wins. Every winner ranked below Jenna was either saved through game-breaking twists or survived through a longer immunity win streak. It's still a rough win in the context of Survivor history, but it's strong enough to earn Jenna the number 40 spot. On to number 39, we are entering the second tier of my ranking that I'm calling ineffective under the radar. This next collection contains players who operated within the majority alliance, but they lacked agency within that group. Some of these players were straight up excluded from plans concocted by their main allies. Others developed their own strategic ideas, but they failed to push the season in that direction. So here at number 39, we have a contestant that I'm generally lower on in terms of her actual player quality. This is one of the legends of Survivor, but I never found either of her winning games all that impressive. It's Sandra Diaz-Twine with her run on Season 20 Survivor Heroes vs. Villains. I already know that people will want to see Sandra ranked higher on the list due to her status as this iconic 2-time winner. But if you put a magnifying glass up to Sandra's winning games, you will find a lot of holes, especially in her second victory. I look at Sandra's win on Season 20 as one where she's poorly positioned in the first half, and in the second half, she earns the title of sole survivor by failing in her strategic misreads. So from the beginning, Sandra starts this season on the Villains tribe, where she's initially in the majority power structure led by Rob Mariano. That alliance controls the early rounds of the game until the point where Tyson basically votes himself out as Russell tricks him into flipping his vote onto Parvati. After that move, Russell gains the trust of Coach and Jerry, which positions Sandra on the bottom of the villains. For the rest of the season, Sandra operates on the periphery of her alliance with no real control. She loses Boston Rob at the following Villains Tribal Council. Then at Final 12, Sandra pulls off what many consider her best move of the season as she plays on Russell's paranoia and deceives him into taking out Coach over herself or her ally Courtney. While Sandra likely held some influence over that decision, I think Russell went through with that vote as a way to maintain this image of an all-women's alliance. Throughout the pre-merge of this season, Russell works to gain the trust of the Heroes tribe by voting out all of the men, and by doing so, he presents himself as an outsider. Voting out Coach was essential to that plan, so I question Sandra's real impact in that tribal council. Later on at the merge, Sandra adapts this anti-Russell sentiment where she constantly attempts and fails to push the vote in that direction. Sandra tries to rally the heroes against Russell at the final 10, the final 9, and the final 6. Obviously, Sandra's lack of agency in that stretch is a knock against her resume, but what's even worse is the fact that Sandra wanted to take out Russell in the first place. She straight up fails to identify Russell as a player that would carry her to the end and burn jury votes in the process. Voting out Russell would be terrible for Sandra's game. Had she succeeded in that goal, she forfeits the numbers to the heroes, who would likely stick together and pick off every villain. While Sandra is probably the last villain standing in that scenario, she still gets taken out around 6th place. In reality, by failing to gather the numbers against Russell, he takes control of the game and elects to drag Sandra to the final tribal where she beats him. Now, to Sandra's credit, she eventually pinpoints Russell's low jury stock and adapts her plan accordingly, but that realization for Sandra comes very late in the post-merge. So I understand the surface-level draw with Sandra's Heroes vs. Villains game, as it is the season that crowned her as the franchise's first 2-time winner. For me, though, I don't look at this run as a very impressive victory. It's one where Sandra constantly works against her best interest, and by failing in those strategic misreads, she stumbles into a win. Now, Sandra never depends on immunity wins or production-based twists, which at least elevates her out of the bottom tier in my ranking. With that said, I feel that this game best defines the overarching tier of ineffective, under-the-radar players. Sandra avoided the target for most of the season, but she played suboptimally from the shadows. She ranks here at number 39. Headed over to number 38, where, to my surprise, I have the same player in Sandra Diaz-Twine, this time with her first winning game on Survivor Pearl Islands. I always considered Sandra's Pearl Islands run the more impressive of the two, but I didn't expect them to rank back-to-back. Like her Heroes vs. Villains game, Sandra works under the radar for most of the season, and she often benefits from failing to achieve her desired outcome. This win ranks ahead of her other victory because there are more moments where Sandra actively makes the correct strategic move, especially in the late game. So early on, Sandra is a member of the Drake tribe, where she initially finds herself on the outside of that group. In fact, it's been reported after the season that if Drake lost the first immunity challenge, Sandra is likely the first boot. It's important to remember that Drake barely wins that relay race in the premiere, which essentially saves Sandra's entire Survivor legacy. Through that pre-merge section of the game, Sandra locks down her main alliance with Rupert and Krista. That trio runs the Drake tribe, voting out the likes of Burton, Trish, and Sean. While Sandra is well positioned for that stretch, I think she relies heavily on her allies to do most of the strategic legwork. This is especially evident at the Trish boot, where Rupert is the one pulling Sean onto their side. The Outcast twist in episode 8 serves as a major luck-based boost to Sandra's game, in that the two players who return to the island are Burton and Lil. Burton held no ill will towards his former Drake tribe, while Lil felt burned by the members of the Morgan tribe. Sandra had no control over who came back into the game, and she gets very lucky in that both returnees align with her side, giving them the numbers advantage. Looking beyond the returning players, the existence of the Outcast twist itself kinda saved Sandra's long-term trajectory. Without that twist, Sandra's tribe enters the merge alongside Sean, who was prepared to flip over to work with the Morgans. In that scenario, the Morgans take control of the game, and Sandra is likely voted out somewhere between the final 10 and the final 7. In reality, the Drake tribe takes control in the early merge as Fairplay and Rupert work as the lead strategists in pulling Burton and Lil back into their alliance. It's another instance of Sandra directly benefiting from the work of her allies. The Drake majority remains in control until the final 8, where Sandra's game completely falls off the rails. In that round, Fairplay and Burton flip against the Drakes to take out one of Sandra's core allies in Rupert. To make matters worse, Sandra does not even follow her group's original plan at Tribal Council as she votes against Fairplay for seemingly personal reasons. Sandra is later well positioned in the end with Fairplay, someone who she can easily beat in a jury vote, but it's important to remember that Sandra did not intend on rolling with him that far into the season. After the Rupert elimination, Sandra is outplayed by Fairplay just about every round as he continues to rebuild trust with her, only to flip against her soon after. At Final 7, Sandra contributes to the Tawana vote, which is definitely a questionable move on her end, considering that Tawana seemed like a player that was more loyal to the Sandra-Krista contingency over the Fairplay-Burton one. Then at Final 6, Sandra is blindsided once again, this time losing her #1 ally in Krista. In that Tribal Council, Sandra and Krista cast their votes against Lil. We never receive a full explanation from Sandra on this vote, and given the era of the show, I am under the assumption that Sandra voted against Lil because she wanted to take Lil out of the game. Sandra later beats Lil in the final Tribal Council, but she did not plan on taking Lil to the end despite her status as the easiest beat on the board. That stretch between the final 8 and the final 6 is an absolute disaster for Sandra. I think that the low points on Sandra's Pearl Islands game are worse than those in her Heroes vs. Villains run. However, this win ranks ahead due to Sandra's work in the endgame. At the final 5, she leads the vote against Burton. That vote is potentially the best strategic move in Sandra's entire Survivor career. But we also need to acknowledge the fact that Burton wins reward that same episode and he selects Fairplay to join him. That pair clearly presented themselves as a duo and they left the women alone at camp to conspire against them. So it's still a positive move by Sandra, but it's also one that's facilitated by the misplay of Burton. At Final 4, Dara loses immunity and she's taken out as the biggest jury threat in the game. Sandra reaches the Final 3 in a great spot against Lil and Fairplay. She defeats either of them in a jury vote, and Lil intends on taking Sandra to the final tribal. I would love to credit Sandra for her late game positioning, but as mentioned earlier, Sandra attempted to vote out both Lil and Fairplay in the post-merge. Had Sandra gotten her way and she rode to the end with her main allies of Krista and Rupert, her chances of winning a jury vote are not as high. Sandra then defeats Lil in a 6-1 jury vote. To be honest, I think that this margin speaks more to the jury's hatred for Lil rather than their admiration for Sandra. Multiple contestants have reported after the season that they did not really respect Sandra's game. They just hated Lil. So overall, I think that Sandra's Pearl Islands game stands as the upgraded version of her Heroes vs. Villains one. At the same time though, there are multiple rounds where Sandra has no clue what's going on as Fairplay is running the show. Plus, she has the Outcast twist which breaks in her favor. It's an up and down game that still ranks in the bottom 10. She's here at 38. On to number 37, we got a winner who I adore from a character perspective. This is one of my absolute favorite contestants from Old School Survivor, who I genuinely wanted to rank higher on the list. But it's difficult to look at her winning game as anything but ineffective and under the radar. It's Vecepia Towery, the winner of Survivor Marquesas. I think that many people look back on Vecepia's win and remember it favorably due to its historical significance. She's the first player to win the show while operating outside the majority alliance. Every winner prior to Vecepia entered the merge with the numbers advantage, they picked off every member of the opposing tribe, and they navigated through the endgame with their original group. Vecepia overcame more adversity than any other player at that point in Survivor history. All of that is very admirable. However, I think Vecepia was not very active in her navigation through the game, and by the late post-merge, she is poorly positioned within the tribe. So in the pre-merge, Vecepia finds her way way into the majority of the original Maramu tribe. She works with Boston Rob and the famous Hunter blindside. At the swap, Vecepia is thrown into a pretty unfavorable spot as her group is outnumbered 5-3. While that tribe attends just one tribal council, you need to credit Vecepia in that she avoids the target better than any of her Maramu allies. Vecepia enters the merge down in numbers according to original tribal lines, but she's still perceived as the lowest level threat amidst the Maramu minority. She loses Boston Rob at Final 10, but then there's the historic Final 9 Tribal Council, which marks the first major flip in Survivor history as the collection of Kathy, Nalia, and Pascal all jump ship from their original Row 2 tribe to work with Vecepia and Sean on the bottom. It's undoubtedly an iconic moment in terms of the development of Survivor strategy, but in reviewing the season, I found that Vecepia was probably the least instrumental to that move. We see Sean and Kathy come up with the idea for the flip. From there, Kathy pitches the move to Nalia and Pascal. That flip was the most impactful vote of the entire season, yet Vecepia was merely a passenger for it. She's safe for the next couple rounds as the new majority picks off the Row 2 players on the bottom in Zoe, then Tammy, then the General. But then we hit the Final 5, where once again, Vecepia loses control. Kathy is positioned in the middle, and she elects to align with the pair of Nalia and Pascal to take out Vecepia's #1 ally in Sean. As a result, Vecepia enters the Final 4 as the consensus target, and her only avenue through that round is just winning immunity, which is pretty bad. The Final 4 challenge ends up being Fallen Comrades, a challenge that Vecepia directly prepared for all season by writing down information on the other players in her journal. It's definitely a positive for Vecepia in that she wins immunity through her preparation, but I also think that Vecepia gets very lucky in terms of the timing of this challenge. With the immunity necklace around her neck, Vecepia identifies the pairing of Nalia and Pascal as a threat, and she aligns with Kathy to break up that pair. She forces a tied vote, which sends Pascal home on the rock draw. That rock draw still creates hesitation for me when looking at Vecepia's game. Yes, there was a 2/3 chance of Vecepia's side winning that draw, but in the event that Kathy goes home at Final 4, Vecepia is once again positioned at the Final 3 in a spot where she needs individual immunity. Then in the final immunity challenge, Kathy drops out, and Vecepia pivots to a Final 2 deal with Nalia. I'm conflicted on this decision by Vecepia as it proved that she could recognize that she had a better chance at beating Nalia in a jury vote over Kathy. At the same time, though, by making her flip a public affair, Vecepia actively burns Kathy's jury vote. That jury vote is absolutely essential for Vecepia because she did not have a lot of win equity. Yes, she barely beats Nalia in a 4-3 jury vote, but she likely loses most other Final Tribal Council combinations against the likes of Kathy, Pascal, or Sean. Even in her ideal endgame scenario against Nalia, Vecepia flops in her Final Tribal Council speech. According to John Carroll, the Final Tribal Council performances on Marquesas were so bad that production made the cast refilm the entire event. So I look at Vecepia's game as one where she constantly benefits from the strategic reads of others, especially at the Final 9. While she finishes the season strong with her maneuvers at the Final 4 and Final 3, I don't think that those 2 rounds are enough to pull Vecepia out of this lower tier. She ranks here at 37. At 36, we got another winner that lands in this ineffective under-the-radar tier. This is a player who probably held more agency than the other winners in this group. I also think that this contestant was better at identifying his optimal strategic move, but he often failed to pull the votes together for his various schemes. It's Adam Klein, the winner of Survivor Millennials versus Gen X. Like Vecepia and Sandra below him, Adam's win is a very mixed bag. I actually had a difficult time determining the best tier for Adam. On the surface, he's not actively positioning himself under the radar. Rather, Adam finds himself in that spot through the strategic dominance of David and to a lesser extent Hannah. Out of the gate, Adam is left out of the Mari vote at the first Millennial Tribal Council. He rebounds after that vote though, and he finds his way into the new Millennial majority. At the tribe swap, Adam is positioned as the swing vote with Ken and Jessica on one side and Taylor and Figgy on the other. I think that Adam makes the correct move there in aligning with the Gen Xers to take out Figgy. That move locks down Adam's alliance with Ken and Jessica, both of whom remain loyal to him through the rest of the season. At the merge, Adam's game gets a bit sloppy as he attempts to target Will, and he shares this plan with one of Will's closest allies in Taylor. As a result, the minority votes against Adam at the final 13, where Michelle goes home. After that, Adam gets caught up in the food smuggling situation with Taylor. Moving ahead to the final 10, Adam gets unlucky as his side loses the Rockdraw Tribal Council. I think you can fault Adam for putting himself in a spot where there was a 1 out of 8 chance of him going home, but even after that setback, Adam's group regains control at final 9, where Will Wall flips over to their side to take out Zeke. When I'm honest, I don't see that Tribal Council as a real testament to Adam's game. In my mind, that was an instance of Will making a hyper-aggressive decision independent of Adam's influence. Then at final 8, Adam is the player that leads the charge against Will. It's probably his most tangible strategic move of the entire season. After the Will boot, Adam's main alliance of himself, Hannah, David, and Ken come together to run the endgame. Through that stretch, though, I don't think that Adam holds much agency. At final 7, we see Hannah direct the vote onto Sunday. Then at final 6, it's David who takes the lead in tricking Jay with a fake idol. Final 5 is another low point for Adam, where he straight up left out of the plan to take out Brett. Now, I think Adam has the correct read there to target David over Brett, but it's still a negative in that Adam cannot convince his allies to follow through with that idea. This leaves Adam at the final 4 with a clear losing scenario. If David wins final immunity, Adam likely goes out in 4th place, and even if David elects to take him to the final tribal, he crushes Adam in a jury vote. At the end of the day, Adam reaches the final tribal council against Hannah and Ken, where he wins in a unanimous jury vote. But I feel that many of those pro-Adam votes derive from the misconceptions of the jury. For example, Chris credits Adam for convincing Ken to take out David at final 4, when in reality, Adam was the least instrumental player to that move. So all in all, while Adam held more agency than other players in this tier, I still consider him an ineffective strategic player on the season. There are multiple rounds where Adam is either sitting in the passenger seat or completely oblivious to what's going on. I'll rank him here at number 36. At 35, I have the second winner from the new era to appear on this list. Out of these 7 new era winners, I had the most difficulty determining the best tier for this player. I think there's an argument for describing him as either safely under the radar or ineffective under the radar. But anyways, here at 35, I got Mike Gabler, the winner of Survivor 43. I think that Gabler was a player who did not hold much control throughout the season, but he was always positioned well to the point where his name was not written down in a single tribal council. In other words, Gabler maintained a wide web of alliances, but those connections never materialized in strategic agency. The difficult aspect to assess with Gabler's game is the reasoning behind his social insulation. I think that many people wanted to connect with Gabler because he was perceived as an easy beat, and I don't necessarily know if they were wrong. Yes, Gabler wins the season against Owen and Cassidy, but I think he loses most other Final Tribal Council scenarios. So with Gabler, you have this contestant who's coasting round to round through his mediocre reputation, but by the end, he finds himself sitting against 2 lower-level threats. So jumping right in, Gabler's low points come at the beginning of the season, where he's positioned towards the bottom of the Baka tribe. He eventually recovers from this spot as he aligns with the Baka boys in Owen and Sammy, and at the Mergatory, Gabler takes the reins for the first and only time all season as he directs the vote onto Ellie. I think a major factor that distinguishes Gabler from Owen and Cassidy in the final tribal is this tangible move on his resume. After the Ellie vote, Gabler is excluded from the Dwight blind side, but starting at the final 11, he takes on this Alec Gabler persona as he submerges underwater and plays the rest of the season under the radar. He connects with the pairing of Cody and Jesse, and he follows their various plans for the next 5 rounds. The final 7 is an important round in Gabler's game in that we clearly hear him identify Cassidy and Owen as his best final tribal scenario. Gabler knows the final destination, but he's not very active in carving his path to that point, where at the final 6, Jesse takes the lead in the Cody vote. Then at final 5, Carla is the consensus boot as the biggest threat on the board. By the time Gabler reaches the final four, the only remaining obstacle in his way is Jesse, who had already painted a massive target on himself through his strategic dominance in the previous 2 rounds. Gabler plays that last round perfectly as he volunteers for firemaking and defeats Jesse. I personally don't value a firemaking win that much in these rankings, but the jury of 43 placed a lot of emphasis on that move. I know that Gabler's endgame looks impressive on paper as the 3 big threats of Cody, Carla, and Jesse are all taken out, but to me, that stretch in 43 feels more like the big threats cannibalizing each other rather than Gabler taking control of the game. He ends up winning in a 7-1-0 jury vote, meaning that he was literally 1 jury vote away from having a perfect game. So I look at Gabler as the prototypical under-the-radar winner of the new era. I think you can move him up or down this list depending on the degree of control you think he held in the post-merge. I'm under the impression that Gabler was pretty passive in his various alliances. I'll put him here at number 35. On to number 34, we can start the third tier of the list that I'm calling clean under the radar. Like the previous tier, these players did not have much control in navigating through the season. Unlike the winners we already discussed, there are rarely any rounds where the players in this tier completely lose control. Further, there are few rounds where these winners are actively targeted. So here at 34, we have a contestant who is known for working behind an icon of the franchise. It's Amber Brkich, the winner of Survivor All-Stars. My ranking for Amber hinges on my belief that she did not hold much agency in working alongside her number 1 ally and now husband, Boston Rob Mariano. If you believe that Rob and Amber held almost equal agency, then you should definitely rank her higher. In my opinion, though, Rob was the one calling the shots and Amber was along for the ride. Most of the alliances that carry Rob and Amber through the game are those established by Rob. While Rob takes the strategic lead in that partnership, you still need to credit Amber for her relationship with him. Rob was dead set on rolling to the final tribal council with Amber. Amber reciprocates these feelings partially because she's in love with Rob, but also because she thinks that he will burn jury votes en route to the end. Amber is 100% correct in this read, but she's pretty ineffective in strategically guiding the season to that point. From the beginning, Amber is in the majority on the Shapira tribe, where she's aligned with Rob. At the first swap, we see Rob and Amber connect with Rupert and Jenna, but I feel that Rob was more instrumental in the creation of that alliance. Then we get to the second swap of the season, where Amber is sent to the opposing Mogo Mogo tribe by herself. It looks like Amber is dead to rights, but she survives due to Rob's pregame alliance with Lex and Kathy. To be honest, I don't fault Amber too much for this round, as the swap itself was incredibly unlucky for her. At the same time, though, it's a clear example of Amber relying on Rob's connections to guide her through the season. Once Amber reaches the merge, her alliance comes back together to knock out all of the Mogo Mogo players in Lex, Kathy, and Cheyenne. During that stretch, Amber allows Rob to play out in front and take the blame for their cutthroat strategic moves. This is especially apparent at the Lex vote, where there's that infamous argument between Rob and Lex at camp, and Amber isn't even on screen. I'd also note that throughout the post-merge, Rob and Amber are perfectly positioned within their main alliance, with Alicia and Tom on one side and Rupert and Jenna on the other. When the numbers dwindle, Rob takes the lead in rolling with Jenna and Rupert to the final four. At the final four, Amber wins a key immunity challenge, which enables them to strong-arm Jenna into flipping against Rupert. By the time Amber reaches the final three, she is in a position where she wins the game as long as Jenna does not win final immunity, as Jenna was planning on voting her out over Rob. Rob ends up winning final immunity, and he takes Amber to the final tribal, which showcases her strong position alongside the season's best strategic player. In the end, Amber defeats Rob in a 4-3 jury vote, but when I'm honest, I feel that most of Amber's jury votes were more so anti-Rob than pro-Amber. We know for a fact that the trio of Lex, Big Tom, and Alicia would not vote for Rob in any final tribal council combination. Amber also picks up the jury vote of Cheyenne through a misconception, as Cheyenne mistakenly believes that Amber was the dominant strategic figure between her and Rob. So I still don't think too highly of Amber's win on All-Stars. It's a win that's highly dependent on the social misplay of Rob rather than the individual excellence of Amber. Yes, Amber was correct in her assessment of Rob, but I think that banking on your competitor's downfalls is a more passive way of playing the game. It earns Amber the number 34 spot. At number 33, I have a winner who I view as similar to Amber in that both of them operated behind a strategically dominant figure for the entire season. It's Natalie White, the winner of Survivor Samoa. The first thing that comes to mind for me when I think of Natalie is her awareness within the game. At an early point in Samoa, Natalie identifies Russell Hantz as a strategically dominant figure who would burn bridges en route to the final tribal council. With that information, she attaches herself to the hip of Russell and enables him to carve their path. While you can definitely criticize Natalie for her lack of agency through the game, I think she does an incredible job in gaining the trust of Russell. Russell considers flipping against every core member of his alliance, with the exception of Natalie. I've said this on the page before, but Natalie's game in Samoa is what people think Sandra did in Heroes vs. Villains, where Sandra constantly attempts and fails to take out Russell on that season. Natalie had the correct read from the very beginning. Through that alliance with Russell, Natalie has a path to the end with a few bumps along the way. In the early days of the Foa tribe, Natalie connects with Russell as a member of his self-described Dumb Girls Alliance. From the beginning, Russell perceives Natalie as a complete non-threat that he intends on dragging to the end. Through the pre-merge, Natalie follows Russell's lead, and she's in the majority at every tribal council. Her alliance with Russell comes at a price though, and at the final 15, she votes out her second closest ally in Ashley. Natalie's Foa tribe enters the merge of Samoa down in numbers 8-4, and at the final 12, Natalie plays an active role in convincing the Galoo majority to flip against each other in taking out Eric. Like Gabler, Natalie makes a solid move in the early merge, then she fades into the background for the rest of the season as she relies on the strategic reads of Russell. The final 11 is a round that drastically benefits Natalie's game through circumstances outside her control. At that point, the Galoo majority comes back together to target Russell, who negates their votes using an idol. In that tribal, Natalie gets very lucky in that first, Russell finds an idol at all, and second, that Galoo elected to not split the vote. Had Russell gone out in that spot, Natalie's side is outnumbered 7-3, and she's likely voted out in the next couple rounds. Then at final 10, Russell convinces Shambo and John to flip over to the Foa alliance, which enables that group to dominate the rest of the post-merge. They pick off former Galoo members between the final 9 and final 7. Even though Russell is the player coordinating the vote in those rounds, Natalie is the one connecting with her competition and creating advocates for the jury. That jury potential is a major positive within Natalie's game, as I think she beats all of her core allies in a jury vote. We later see her beat Russell and Mick in the end, and she more than likely defeats Shambo and Jason as well. The only player who had a real shot at beating Natalie in a jury vote was Brett, who, to be fair, came one immunity challenge away from winning the season. I think you can fault Natalie in that she needed Russell to beat Brett in that last challenge. At the same time though, even if Brett won final immunity, I think he takes Natalie to the end, so her path to the final tribal was guaranteed either way, but the win itself was not. So I can understand the argument for Natalie ranking lower on the list due to her lack of agency, but I think her positioning as well as her win equity are enough to boost her up to the number 33 spot. On to the number 32 spot, we will start up my fourth tier in the ranking that I'm calling Section Dominance. This is a group of players who ran the game for part of the season, but they either lost control at some point or faded into the background. So here at 32, I have a winner who I considered ranking higher on the list. Like the other winners in this tier, this player lost control for part of the game, but I feel that loss of agency was more so due to pre-merge challenge results rather than a glaring strategic mistake on her end. It's Danni Boatwright, the winner of Survivor Guatemala. Evaluating Danni's game is a bit difficult as she's not very prominent in the season's edit. Danni herself admits that she was not completely transparent during confessionals because she was worried that production would leak her information to other players. Everything up until the merge of Guatemala is great for Danni. She really runs the season through those first 7 episodes. In her swap tribe, Danni aligns with Brandon, and the two of them work at the center of the majority alliance, directing the target onto the likes of Blake, Brian, and Amy. Now, it's impressive that Danni acquired power in the game, but I don't know if she made the right decisions with that agency. The Blake and Brian votes in particular stand out as questionable moves. Danni's tribe is later decimated in the post-merge because they were down in numbers 6-4. Had Danni kept some of those physical players around, then maybe the split is not so lopsided. Then we get to the merge, where everything kind of falls apart for Danni. Her entire tribe is knocked out by the opposing Nakum alliance. By the final 6, Danni has no remaining pre-merge allies. Now, Danni deserves respect for her threat level management in that part of the game, as she was the last one standing despite her history of dominating the pre-merge. At the same time though, it's a long section of the season where Danni is completely out of the loop. It's not until the final 6 that Danni recovers as she connects with Rafe, the head strategist of the majority. That alliance with Rafe pays major dividends as he pulls Danni further into the season. Rafe knows that Danni has 3 locked jury votes in Brandon, Bobby John, and Gary, who were all aligned with her in the pre-merge. At the end of the day though, he's blinded by their friendship and he takes Danni to the final 3 over players like Lydia, who he could easily defeat in the final immunity challenge. It's really impressive that Danni was able to recover and sneak her way into the dominant power structure, but she never holds any legitimate agency within that alliance. It's still Rafe calling the shots, with Danni hiding in the background. Then we get to the final 3, where Danni is positioned as the obvious target. If either Stephanie or Rafe win final immunity, Danni gets voted out, which is pretty bad. To be fair, Danni is the consensus target because she is so well liked by the jury. I think Danni beats both Stephanie and Rafe in a jury vote by a solid margin. So with Danni, we're looking at a player with poor late game positioning, but also high win equity. She ends up winning that final immunity challenge, takes Stephanie to the final tribal, and wins in a 6-1 jury vote. So I feel that Danni's win on Guatemala does a lot more for my assessment of her as a Survivor player, as she proves on this season that she can operate from both the top and the bottom. As it pertains to my winner ranking, this game is nowhere close to a dominant performance. For around half the season, Danni is either outside the majority or relying on Rafe to carry her round to round. The fact that her alliance with Rafe had an expiration date also draws major concerns for me. It's Danni's dominance in the pre-merge of Guatemala that elevates her in my ranking. I'll put her here at number 32. On to number 31, we can talk about one of my favorite winners in the history of the show. It's Denise Stapley, the winner of Survivor Philippines. Denise is known for being the only winner that survives every possible tribal council, which speaks volumes to her social game. Now, Denise isn't skating through these tribals easily. There are multiple rounds throughout the season where she becomes a legitimate target, but the fact that she survived every tribal is still very impressive. I put Denise in this section dominance tier because she controls her initial tribe in the early game, but she's in and out of the majority throughout the post-merge. Denise starts Survivor Philippines on the Matsing tribe, which is widely regarded as one of the worst tribes in the history of the show. Matsing loses every immunity challenge in the pre-merge. As her group is slowly decimated, Denise positions herself at its core alongside Malcolm and Russell Swan. When that tribe cuts down to just that trio, Denise is positioned in the middle, and she elects to vote out Russell. That move solidifies her alliance with Malcolm through the rest of the post-merge. When the Matsing tribe dissolves and Denise swaps over to the Calabao tribe, she's completely outnumbered 6-1, but she flies under the radar. She aligns with the men of the tribe and survives 2 eliminations. I feel like the pre-merge of this season really proved that Denise could excel from a position of power or from the bottom. It's honestly one of the best pre-merge games of any winner on this list. The post-merge of Philippines is a different story. There are multiple rounds where Denise just doesn't really know what's going on, and when she's in the loop, it's mainly through her connection with Malcolm. Early on, Denise is on the wrong side of the RC vote and the Jeff Kent vote. At Final 8, we see Denise's Final 4 alliance come together, but it's not due to the active work of Denise herself. Malcolm is the player who aligns with Scoopin and Lisa, forming a Final 4 deal, as he connected with them in the swap section of the game. It's great that Denise was roped into that plan, but it's a clear example of her relying on the strategic work of Malcolm. That new alliance steamrolls the game from the final 7 through the final 5, and in that stretch, Denise forfeits many of her pre-merge allies. Then at final 4, we have one of the biggest issues that I take with Denise's win, in that her outlook on the final tribal was pretty bad. She originally intended on going to the end with Malcolm in a spot where Malcolm likely beats her. Denise only flips on Malcolm because he's hesitant to accept a final 3 deal. In my mind, Denise relies on the poor play of Malcolm to wake her up and help her identify her ideal final tribal council scenario. Other winners on this list had the correct read from the very beginning. Denise then defeats Scoopin and Lisa in a 6-1-1 jury vote, and I think Denise's win equity was another standout aspect of her game. Outside of Malcolm, I think Denise beats most other players in a jury vote. So like I said earlier, Denise has one of the best pre-merge games of any winner, but I think she's overly dependent on Malcolm in the second half. Combine that with the fact that her outlook on the final tribal was just wrong, and you get the 31st best winning game of Survivor. So another 10 rankings in the books. Come back next week where I'll discuss the 30 through 21 selections.